Welcome to the Therapist Burnout Podcast, episode 82. Hey, therapist, welcome back. Today I have a listener question. So I'm going to start doing some Ask Me Anything episodes. If you would like to submit a question when I do this, I have a couple of them that are in the hopper now. So if you would like to have a question answered on the podcast, you can do that via my website. I'll link that in the show notes. It's a long URL because my name is super long, but it's drjenblanchett.com and it's my podcast page. So it's up there so you can find it there, but there is a link in the show notes. Okay. So here's the question. How could a newer therapist about 1 year into practice navigate a trauma heavy caseload while dealing with the grief of a parent being diagnosed with an aggressive form of brain cancer? And so I think with that question, I'm going to also talk about navigating difficult seasons in your work as a therapist or as a human. And I think the first thing I would want to say to this person is that I'm so sorry that that's what you're holding. That's a massive thing to carry, especially in your first year of practice. Full stop, full stop. And I recorded, just so you know, I recorded a whole 8-minute response that I felt like I wanted to give more time to this to answer your question. So even in hearing it, it just felt really heavy to me that I wanted to give it a little more time and breath and to really think through it. So I want to zoom out and just talk about younger therapists or people that are early career professionals. So we know, and especially in a recent Moodle study that showed in 2025, younger therapists and early career professionals are statistically more prone to burnout. So we know that. So it's not because you're weak, you're likely holding a lot. And early in our careers, I think we're really asked to see the most difficult clients likely we will ever see just from an acuity standpoint. So our clients are more challenging. They have a greater depth and breadth of psychopathology than likely we'll see in other parts of our career. And I think a personal crisis on top of this really heavy caseload can likely feel like, I don't know how I'm going to hold this all, especially not knowing maybe the trajectory of your parents' cancer journey. I don't know if that means they will recover from this brain cancer or they will not recover from this brain cancer. If it is a terminal diagnosis, I don't know that. But it sounds like it's going to be very intense if it's an aggressive form of brain cancer, perhaps surgery, perhaps treatment, chemo. I know that every cancer is different in the treatment. So I think one, I hear this, I think of kind of that primary trauma of your own grief and fear of your parents' illness and potential loss of life. I don't know if that's the case, as well as secondary trauma of holding what you're holding for your clients, whatever impacts that's having in your nervous system. So I feel like that frequently happens for therapists where we might be struggling in our own traumatic experiences or dealing with past traumas, and at the same time dealing with difficult situations, perhaps by the trauma work that you're doing as a therapist. And what I know about nervous systems is that there is just a certain quotient of caring that we can do before our nervous system will take over, right? It will do things to make sure that we do release. I know this because I developed panic attacks in COVID. And it's so funny that initially as a therapist, I went into trauma work and I felt almost invincible, which sounds pretty messed up now. But I didn't have any big T trauma from childhood, and I thought I did really well with it. I thought that I could hold it really well, and I think it wasn't until I had a really, I think, earth-shattering trauma case that I worked on for myself, and first I felt like not even prepared for that. I was also pregnant, and so I think it brought up all these things in me, and I had acute vicarious trauma where I was dreaming about the client's material. I needed to go to my own therapy. Subsequently, I actually started with prolonged exposure therapy with that particular individual. And I went to an EMDR training thinking, okay, like I need some more training on this. I think me now, if I did not have those skill sets, I should have referred that client out. But me then felt like I did, I had a whole trauma class. I worked a foster care therapeutic caseworker. I had been working in trauma. I did my dissertation on compassion fatigue and other trauma. So I knew quite a bit about trauma, but I didn't have lived experience of doing the actual psychotherapy with a client besides prolonged exposure, which is evidence based. So prolonged exposure is one of the most studied treatments for PTSD. Like zooming out for trauma therapy, I know I'm going on a little side road here. Essentially, the individual needs to have the traumatic incident up and no longer feel the physiological distress in their bodies. That is the mechanism of function of any trauma therapy, right? Whatever it is. For me, I had panic attacks while driving. We'll just take my example, which I mostly have dealt with. So I'm okay to talk about that. I need to think about being on the highway and not having those physiological sensations of I'm about to die. I'm going to crash into this car. I almost drove into oncoming traffic at one point in time because I feel my body was really in a prolonged sympathetic dominance. Fight or flight is another way to say that for so long that it almost distorted reality. So, yes, it was efficacious and I had training in it, but I hadn't done a lot of trauma therapy with clients. Yeah, so I think from that example, just I know I went really squirrely for a minute. I think just knowing that there will be times in our career where we don't know how the work is going to impact us. And with your own personal experience that's going on right now, where personal life is going to take a lot from you, thinking about what changes do you need to make to your work life while you're dealing with this crisis in your personal life. And I think, regardless of how seasoned we are in our careers, we might need to change our caseload during difficult times. And I think even if we can anticipate this, when we're going through crisis, I think our own needs are not readily apparent to us while we are in it. And I could definitely see that. I have shared on this podcast many times that I lost two clients during COVID. And I didn't really realize the emotional impact of that until much, much later. And in hindsight, looking at how that kept me guarded. And I talked a little bit of having a more unguarded heart now that I have. But as a therapist, I felt like I really had to keep my emotions closer to the vest because I felt like they were going to spill out everywhere. And I think there's this implicit saying in our field that we need to keep on going because that's what we do. We keep caring. That's our whole job. Like, we listen to people, we take care of people. We're there for them. We show up when other people don't show up. But we don't realize the costs that it can bring to our own lives, especially when we're about to go through a depleting time in our lives. I would just say an example from my own life is I really didn't realize the emotional output of mothering my children in the younger years. I had a son who I had surgery with while I was pregnant, and then he subsequently had heart surgery. I had a full-time agency job. And when it was time for me to think about going back to work, I could not go back to work. I could not leave that baby. I had my own personal trauma. And I think because I was already out of the work and I was at home with my infant, there was just no possible way I felt like I could go back to work and leave him at a daycare. I just couldn't do it. Instead of finding maybe a part time option, I launched my private practice. And honestly, private practice worked for me in the way it worked for me. I taught online like psychology classes for a while, and my practice was pretty part time. It was probably like 1 or 2 days a week that I would leave the home, and my mother in law would take care of my son for a day or two. But I also didn't realize like the admin cost of private practice and all that entails. So I think all that to say, we may not realize really how much the work is taking from our personal lives and to really like weigh this in perspective in a time period. Where do you want to be? How much time do you want to be with your parent during this crisis? Does that mean your job needs to change? Maybe it doesn't. I'm not making going to make assumptions that you need to like quit your job or you can't do your work. But I think our nervous systems give us this information, tell us, no, I really can't do that. Or maybe I need to work just 2 days a week during this season. And to really like drop into your body, sit with it for a weekend, with it for a little while to see what that is. And while I don't offer advice, I'm just giving reflections, sharing some of my own experience, and hopefully just helping you ask some questions for yourself. I kind of think of this mantra that I I've come up with, like, we have enough time, life is long. Is there a way you can be there for your parent, even if it's like a week of time or in shorter bursts of time that can feel like you're there? Is there a way to pause work for a little while? Is that financially viable for you? So there's lots of things to think about. So asking yourself, like, what is your true capacity for work in this season? That's for anyone, for all of you, for anyone going through a difficult personal season. Really sit with this question. What is your true capacity for work in this season? Whether it's a death in the family or you have a child that is going through something really dramatic. For me, thinking of myself as a new mother, for me as a therapist in COVID, taking care of my children who were quite small, that would be a time to think of a time to think about capacity. This question: is there other work that could bring income without being as emotionally demanding? For me, when I was in, mothering young children, I also taught online psychology classes. They didn't pay a lot, honestly, but they did not take the emotional energy that it took to do therapy. So that helped make ends meet at that point in time. And it took the pressure off of me needing to work more as a therapist. I hear from therapists all the time, like, I can't do as much one to one. This is really, really heavy. Like sometimes we just need a different job. And we don't have to think too hard about it. Like we, can do some other things, whether that be doing some kind of gig work. Is there any financial wiggle room to take time off? So consider that as a question for you to think about. Is it just some time off you need? Is there any financial wiggle room in your particular situation to take time off? So when we're in a crisis, it is normal to be in sympathetic dominance. Our sympathetic nervous system activates us for threat. So if we are in high alert, keep going mode, your tendency and your default is to keep doing everything because dropping one ball can feel like the whole thing is going to fall down. So having pauses to really sit with this and think through, okay, what are things that I can set down right now? So during seasons like this, I think putting in some rhythms of rest for yourself are going to be really important. So, where are there some times where you can start doing some kind of ritual of rest and dropping into your body, whether it be a short walk between your sessions? Maybe it's one night a week where you don't talk about work or caregiving, or, it's a time out with a friend once a week. Doing some rituals or spiritual practices can be really, really helpful. When I've worked with people in grief work, especially, talking about this has been vital to them. So adding in maybe lighting a candle, just noticing what comes up during that time, having a beginning, middle, and end, listening to a song, letting what comes up, attending a faith or community service that feels supportive. Also think about receiving care. So are there any friends or relatives that you could give you even small pockets of respite? Maybe that's cooking a meal, maybe that's sitting with your parent at the hospital. Maybe that's picking up your kids. I don't know your situation. So thinking of that, like really calling in all the favors. And where can you accept help without any guilt? When I think of receiving care, I have been notoriously bad at doing that. And I'm learning to do it more now. But I remember a time after a surgery where I had somebody, I was going to church at that time, and I cooked them a meal. and I had just recovered from surgery. And I showed up at this person's house. They had forgotten that I was down to cook them a meal, and I walk into their whole extended family, and they're eating another meal, and I was like, "Oh, brought you food. Here it is." And I left and I cried because I didn't have it to give. I really did not have it to give to make that person a meal. That is really choking me up for some reason. And I say that because I know that therapists are these type of people that continue to give when they don't have it. And so I know it's why I want to say it is because I know it's so important for anyone that's listening to this to hear that you are deserving of that kind of care. And when I imagined if you were in front of me, I'd imagine like wrapping you up in blankets. I used to quilt and I was like, oh, I wish I had like a quilt that I would make for this person and wrap them up because this feels so, so heavy. And I want you to be cared for as much as anyone you're supporting right now. So if this is you, if this feels like you're not alone, not at all. I've been in heavy seasons while still showing up for clients. And I really, really wish someone would have told me to step back sooner than I did. So I hope that was helpful in hearing this question that I know therapists are struggling with right now. I would love to have more of these questions. I have a couple more that people have asked that I'm going to be having on the podcast, maybe sooner than later. So I have an episode next week where I'm really talking about like putting in rhythms for fall. That's just been something that's been on my mind. And so just thinking through that. And I also wanted to give a shout out to someone who left me a review on Apple Podcasts. I love when people do this. I never ask for a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Podcasters tell me it doesn't really like help with discoverability, but maybe it does. I think when you see a podcast that has lots of good reviews, then that's probably helpful in knowing that's a good podcast. So I just want to thank Allison for leaving this review. She said, I've listened to quite a few therapist hosted podcasts on doing private practice and some way surviving it, managing or preventing burnout. Bleh. That's just my addition to when I hear preventing burnout. I just do little like throw up noises. Raising fees, marketing. I quickly end up pretty grossed out by them because they all feel like I'm listening to a daytime infomercial. So true. Uh, but Jen is super my speed, and I know she has a business, a course. I don't really have one right now, but I'm working on one. But she's not pushy or aggressive. Yeah, no, I'm not going to hunt you down. I really appreciate how honest and vulnerable she is. I feel more alone and isolated hearing many of the other podcasters, and I feel like I'm getting coffee with an old friend who gets me, and it has great insight when I hear her. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. I just want to say, Allison, that made my day to hear that. And yeah, I think that felt really, really good. And there are some great therapist podcasters out there. So I'm not trying to put any of them down. And that is her perspective on some of them. But I feel like any podcast can get that way, perhaps if they're, selling their services hardcore. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, if you would like to keep the conversation going, I'm going to put the Ask Me Anything submission in my newsletter as well. So that will be on the pen pal list. And I do share different stuff on there. So you get behind the scenes, my thoughts, the juicy bits that I don't even feel vulnerable to share on here, which it feels like it's a vulnerability share fest on the podcast, and get even more on my free pen pal list. It's for y'all. So get that link in the show notes, and it's the best way to stay connected. All right. Yeah. So if you've enjoying hearing the podcast, maybe give me another review. Maybe I'll read it here again. I do appreciate it. And it means a lot. And thank you for listening. I really do appreciate it. Okay.